Well, what to watch out for if you are taking out a mortgage. Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, mortgage rates are up, and that means a higher cost for home payments. There are a lot of confusing programs surfacing that you need to be aware of as well. Today, Mortgage Mark, our Prudent Money contributor, is here today to tell us some details. Mark, great to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me, as always, my friend.
You know, it's just very interesting as we watch what the Federal Reserve Board is doing, raising rates. Of course, they raised rates again today, not unexpected by any stretch. But it just seems like they're doing it for naught because nothing's responding to it. And so you have interest rates on the 10-year Treasury bond down about the same place it was in April, and they've raised rates. What happened to it? Just doesn't seem like mortgage rates have really followed suit. What are you seeing with all that?
You know, I agree. Now, the truth be told, I saw the announcement saying they increased another 0.75, but I haven't seen the statement made. So there could be some devil in the details. But truthfully, not a lot's happened today. Simply because, yes, obviously the markets responded very well to that. I saw at least when I last checked. But truthfully, as the Fed raises rates, they're trying to fight inflation, right? They're trying to raise rates to make everything just slow down a bit, demand destruction, or whatever they want to call it. They're trying to do that where they taper demand in hopes of, calming down inflation. So inflation's north of 9% right now. It's 9.1, and they're trying to calm that down. And our mortgage rates, the idea is, when is something baked in the cake? So today's 0.75 was no surprise. I was somewhat hoping to see maybe they do 1%, do a full 100 basis points, because then they can at least send the message to say we're serious about taking down inflation. Because that's why mortgage rates, to your point, they've gone up, gone down, but now they've kind of just been hovering for the last months, 4 to 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it's been. They've kind of just been going a little bit sideways. Some days good, some days bad. But I think we're all just waiting to see, does the Fed have this under control? Are they going to get inflation to subside? And really, that's going to be what I'm looking for over the next month or two. Is just what do those inflation numbers do? Because that's going to dictate what the Fed does.
Yeah, I guess the question that I have, and I believe this to be the truth the entire time, is that, and what your opinion on it is, but the real inflation numbers I think are a whole lot higher. And if you look at, of course, what gasoline is where it's at, and food, the cost of food, I don't know about your trips to the grocery store, but mine are 20 to 25% more than they used to be. And so really to move the Fed funds rate where they really need to move it, I don't think is even possible. So it'll be interesting to see. I've kind of had this theory that they've really got to take the stock market down and maybe take the bond market down in order to really control inflation. And it just seems like nothing is responding to what they're doing.
Well, and that's so true. But think about this. They only have so much influence, right? Like, they can certainly create a little recession to where maybe, whether they have a soft landing recession to be determined, but they can squash demand to some degree, but they can't grow more wheat. They can't force, oil producers to pump more. So those are some big ticket items where your food prices are significantly higher until Russia decides to play nice and goes away. And even then, it'll take a long time for them to get that food supply back online, right? But food chains, the Fed can't grow crops. They can't create more food. They can only, we still have to eat. We still are going to use our cars. We're still going to go places. So from a gas and food place, to your point, that's harder to fix, right? Raising rates isn't going to make me stop going to the grocery store. But to your point, I think it's a lot of it's going to be longer lasting. The question is what they do have influence over. If they've raised rates high enough to where the cost of borrowing suddenly becomes less appealing. And that's the other part too, is the market, like the people, the consumers don't seem to be responding. I know more people now on vacation than ever. I don't know anybody that's lost their jobs outside of just a few industries. But like the consumer's still strong and still spending money, even though rates are higher or costs are higher. People are still spending money. So you're right. What they're doing doesn't seem to be aggressive enough at this point. I am curious as to how much farther do they need to go to actually change the mentality and the behaviors.
Well, tell me this: what are rates doing right now? And of course, you're getting this off of a website, so there's the one disclaimer.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so everybody, if you listen long enough, you know when the question about rates, I'll always quote FreddieMac.com, right? And the reason why is it's Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, everybody knows them, and that's the rate that you see scrolling across newspapers and headlines, and that is updated once a week on Thursdays, so you'll see it change tomorrow. But right now, they've been hovering in that mid-fives. Like if you go to FreddieMac.com today, it'll show you a 5.54, 0.8 points. So that 0.8 points, that's been around for, on Freddie Mac's website for a long time. But that's the other part of today's piece is, while the rates may not be too volatile, they may be in that, let's just call it mid-fives. Sure, they might sneak up to the high fives or low fives here and there. But those points, a lot of times what changes. And that's the part where while the rates may seem like they're being more stable, it could be that cost of borrowing could be the piece that you got to pay attention to.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the ways that people can lower those monthly payments, but maybe not such a good idea. There's kind of that allure of the adjustable rate mortgage, gives you that lower payment. How are ARMs looking today, and what are the pros and cons of using them in this particular environment?
Well, so ARMS, for those that don't know, when somebody says ARMS, it's an acronym. It stands for Adjustable Rate Mortgage. And so what that means is you come in, and let's just use an example. I'll pick a 5-year ARM. So these ARMs, most times, and again, every loan may be different, but for the most part, you're going to find them, let's say they're 30-year mortgages. Like you can have this mortgage for 30 years. What the ARM says is, in my example, this 5-year ARM, the rate you get out of the gate is going to be set for 5 years. But on month 61, so 5 years and 1 month, that payment, that rate will change based on wherever the market is 5 years from now. So you are seeing ARMs come into play. Why? Because ARMs are lower than fixed rates, typically. So what you'll see is like, okay, here's your generic rate like we just talked about on Freddie Mac. But if somebody's taking an ARM, the enticing piece is that rate's lower because the banks don't have as much risk. They're only fixed for 5 years. And so what you'll see now is ARMs were less than 2% of the market. Suddenly now, I haven't seen the most recent stat, but it's closer to 8 to 10%. And this is only in the last handful of months. So folks are now going towards the ARMs to try to get the payment of yesterday. Meaning when rates last year were in the 3s and 4s, taking an ARM today, they're willing to accept that risk of not knowing what's going to come in 5 years, but to take that lower rate today for that lower payment. Is it a good thing or bad thing? To be determined. But you just need to know if you're having that conversation or if you're considering the ARM, you just need to make sure you're more educated. And I think that's where people get in trouble. If they go into products, they got a high-level thought, to what it is conceptually, but they don't truly understand the mechanics. I think that's the piece that people need to look out for because you can get in trouble because you don't know what your payments are going to be when those things adjust later on.
Talk a little bit about what you're seeing as far as the activity goes in the real estate markets.
So the markets have been strangely quiet in the last 45 days in terms of new leads coming in. So we still got a lot of folks that we've been talking to for a while, but I'd say generically speaking, and I won't speak for anybody, but the folks I know, leads are down about 25%, or the activity, the phone calls are down about 25% right now. And my personal theory, Bob, and I'm sounds like a joke, but I'm not. I think it could just be, yes, it's a combination of higher rates. It could be a combination of maybe the market. People want to see what comes, see what housing prices will do in the next few months. But truthfully, I think a lot of it is just for the first time in 3 years, people are able to travel. It seems like everybody I know, I got friends that are finally going to Spain and going to Europe and going all these different places. I have 12 people that we meet every day for a meeting, and one Friday there were only 4 of us because 8 of them were on vacation. So the market for since June has been very quiet. The housing prices seem to be semi-normal. There's still some appreciation in the market, believe it or not, but we have seen a lot of things that are starting to just become more normal. It's no longer 20 people vying for the same house. Now it's, it may be more of a balanced market at this moment.
It makes me wonder if you look at all the entire put all the demand together for real estate. What percentage of that demand really does need to make a transaction happen, and then what percentage is, well, I could sell my house today or not, or I could buy a house today or not. It's no big deal. Do you have any feel for that? Because that really does factor into the equation.
You and I've had that conversation. That's such a good point too, because we've talked about it. Like the stats we've seen thrown around for the last year or whatever it's been is unlike the mortgage meltdown days. Because I know you and I've had those conversations about, oh my gosh, the reason why this is quote unquote different, right? Back in the 07, 08 time period, there were 1 million home buyers supposedly, with 3 million homes for sale. The stats have been thrown around this last year or two, and now there's 3 million people wanting to buy homes and only 1 million homes in supply. But going back to what you just alluded to, what makes a home buyer? Is that, hey, I'm an investor and I want to buy a home? Well, I can easily decide tomorrow I no longer want to buy a home, and there's, I'm gone and out of the market. But what percentage are the folks that are moving, got relocated cross country, and I got a family of, 5 people, 6 people. I'm not going into an apartment, and there's nothing to rent. I mean, that's the hard part too, is the rental market's so crazy. So to answer your question, Bob, the stats supposedly show about 3 million home buyers with about 1 million homes out there that they can actually purchase. Let's just say maybe a third of those folks, are people like investors that don't, they don't have to buy. That takes you down to 2 million. Let's say of that 2 million, there's some folks that don't have to sell to go buy, or maybe they can live with somebody else, or they can stay where they're at. Even if you cut that by 50%, it puts you in a balanced market with 1 million buyers and 1 million homes for sale. So there is still a very strong demand. I think right now the market's just taking that summer breather, and I think everybody's kind of just waiting to see what happens. But I do believe, this isn't a long term for everything. It's just whether it's 6 months or a year, who knows? But the reality is it's still a very balanced market.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a question today come up from a client that was talking about, are we heading towards that time again where real estate gets hit pretty hard? You get a lot of foreclosures, you find great deals, you buy them, you fix them back up, and you sell them. And we are so far from that type of a situation. Even though foreclosures are up, and if we head into traditional recession, if we're already there and it gets worse, we'll see more of that happen. But on the flip side of that, there is a ton of demand that would eat up that foreclosure market.
Well, not only that, I mean, house prices in the last 2 years, I saw a stat just the other day, in the last 2 years, it's estimated that the overall nationwide average is homes are up 40%. So you only get foreclosed on when you can't sell your home. Like if I'm in trouble and I need money, chances are the average homeowner right now, it's something close to this stat. So I've seen this one a couple different places, a couple different times, but generically speaking, like literally, and it's hard to believe, 50% of Americans have about 45% equity in their home. You will not get foreclosed on with 45% on equity in your home. Why? Because you'll just sell it. Even if you sell it at a discount, you'll just sell it. If I can walk away and get 50 grand put in my pocket, that sells a lot of financial stress, right? So
sure.
I just don't think we're heading towards we're not heading there. And by the way, the loans these days, they're not the 100% no income, no assets stuff from the 06, 07 time period. Like these are people that had to qualify for the mortgage. So in theory, you should have a better loan product out there where if somebody does lose their job, they should have the ability to sell. And like you said, there's enough demand to at least absorb that home if it does go for sale, because there's still a very short supply of homes for sale.
Of course, you're starting to see a lot of advertisements from mortgage companies with advertising these really low rates. And then the lurking in the background is the fine print of the points that you have to pay. Talk a little bit. I think it makes sense to kind of park here and talk a little bit about how points work and what the pros and cons are, because we're seeing more and more of that advertised.
Yeah. So there's for points, right? Everybody's I don't say everybody. A lot of if somebody's bought a home before, we get folks saying, I don't want to pay any points. But what is a point? Well, a point is some percentage. 1 point is 1% of your loan amount. And so there's a trade-off. If somebody wants to pay points, whether it's 1 point, 3 points, whatever, the trade-off is you get a lower interest rate. So the question is that worth it? I don't know. Here's why. Use your crystal ball, right? So if somebody's going to pay $4,000, let's just use that number for grins, $4,000 points at closing, but it saves them, again, making up numbers, $200 a month, right? So you just got to do the math to say, okay, if they're putting down that much money, where's that break-even period to where that $4,000 makes it worth it, to where you save that $200 a month equals that $4,000. So call it, a little bit less than 2 years in this example. So is it worth paying that point? Sure. If somebody's going to have that mortgage longer than 2 years, that makes sense. If the numbers were, hey, pay $10,000 and save that money, suddenly it may not, because it'll take way too long, 5, 6, 7 years before you see that. Because this is the other crystal ball, Bob, which takes us down another bunny trail. But will rates come back down, right? When inflation goes from 9.x back to, hopefully sometime sooner than later, back to 3.x. And if we're in a recession, do rates come down? Do they go back in the fours? So even if you get today's making up a number, 5.7% rate, there could be an opportunity in a year or two, if rates go down to 4, if you say, I'm going to refinance, into the 4s, you could refinance. So that's where you just have to play that crystal ball game as well. It's not just you, how long you live in the home. It's what does your gut tell you, and what's the overall scenario look like. And that's what's making it hard, because clearly, I will be the first to admit, nobody knows what the future is, myself included. So that's where it makes it hard, whether it's worth paying those points and getting that lower rate that's being advertised.
Yeah, it's a big gamble. This leads me to what Dave Ramsey said 2 or 3 weeks ago, that he almost guarantees that home prices will be higher in 5 years. He says, go ahead, buy at a higher interest rate and refinance, as if this is just an easy formula that's going to happen. Do you have any problems with that advice? I really do, from the standpoint of a guy like that, his influence, to be so sure that things are just going to pan out that way when we live in pretty uncertain times.
Yeah, look. I'll say this: the only absolute I'm ever going to make is you shouldn't make absolutes, right?
Right, exactly.
And so let's say that will homes be higher in 5 years? I don't know. The probability says the farther out in time you go, will the stock market be higher? I don't know. Higher than it was in 1929. At some point in there, there's a high and a low, and so you may be right, you may not. I would say this: my advice to folks is homes. Let's talk primary homes. I'm buying a home to live in it, right? Because that's the majority of the population. Buy the home when it's right for you. Yes, you could argue, okay, maybe now's not the right time for X, Y, and Z because of the market. But truthfully, if you got married, you find out you're having triplets. You're in a 900 square foot apartment. Financially, your job's sound. You're ready to go. You have the money. Rents are going up 20, 30%. It's a good time to buy. Like, why you can say, man, 5 years from now, the house may be more, maybe less. It's a home, right? Fundamentally, people have to live somewhere. So I don't know that I would say buy today because their prices are going to be higher in 5 years. They might. I could argue that, it could be higher, it could be lower, it could be the same. But if you're buying it for a home, and it's whether you pay rent or pay a mortgage, I'm of the belief that a home is a great way to build wealth. It's not the primary reason why I'd recommend somebody purchase, but it's certainly a really good compensating factor. But even if homes are lower, I don't care what my home's value is right now because I'm not selling it. I'm not selling for 10 plus years. I got kids that are, 11 and 8. Like, I'm not going anywhere. So I don't care if my home gets cut in 50%. It won't make me feel good. But I do believe long term, this is much better than renting. So I agree with you. I don't love the, any absolute being used by anybody of influence, or anybody, period. But the reality is, I do think buy when the time is right for you to buy, and you don't have a crystal ball. So whether it's higher or lower, to be determined. But I think buying at the right time sure beats the alternative than renting, for sure.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. I'm talking to Mortgage Mark, and you can get more information on Mark going to mortgagemark.com. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening with builders. First describe what builders are going through right now with current inventory, and then, are we seeing a lot of new builds? What's the activity? We don't really stop and focus on new builds, so I thought I'd ask.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's interesting, too, because it depends on the builder. So we do a lot of new construction, and Dallas-Fort Worth is certainly a hot market. A lot of folks coming in from the West Coast and really everywhere around the country. But you got builders where for the last 2 years they've had just massive headaches just putting product on the ground, just getting something. It takes months for permits. It could take months just to get windows. So they've really had trouble doing this. So what we've seen is, I'll give you, 3 stories real quick, or 3 examples. One builder, hey, have you seen the slowdown in the last, 30, 60 days? No, man, we haven't had a thing to sell because we can't get these homes finished. We can't get them built, right? We're still waiting on windows and HVAC, so they haven't seen it. And a lot of times they're waiting to sell their homes when something's about 60 days out. So another builder is now saying, man, I got 8 homes hitting this month in this one community. And so that's where a lot of builders who've been playing catch up are starting to get caught up, and they're getting a lot of products. So while I said the market could be in balance, that may be true, but if your community, your neighborhood has 4 builders in it, each one putting 8 homes for sale this month, that's where you see the pockets of where the market could be softening, to say, man, if I go to this new home development, I may see 20 homes in here for sale. Right? It's one thing to have 20 homes spread throughout all of North Texas, but 20 in one spot. The builders are now, offering incentives. They're trying to entice folks to say, man, I know rates are up. I know the cost of homes are up. But if we can get you in there, they are starting to offer a lot more incentives, whether it means lowering the price or offering financing incentives to adjust the rate. They're doing that too.
Yeah, so talk about that for just a second. We've got about a minute and a half left. You sent me a text today and said there's builder incentives going on where you would get 3.5%, 4.5%, 5.5% going forward.
It's called a buy down. It's really pretty cool. So whether or not it's right for you for long term to be determined. But basically, let's just use the example of 5.5%. Today's rate, however you want to structure it, is a 5.5 rate. The builder may say, hey, look, we'll give you money, and basically they'll pay the difference. They're the ones paying the difference in this interest, but they'll say for year one, the mortgage companies can structure it this way. Most of them can, I would think. Your first year payment is based off a 3.5% interest rate. Year 2 would be based off 4.5%, and year 3 and beyond is where it hits that normal 5.5 rate. So the builder is basically offering these incentives to say, hey, we'll pick up the difference in those first 2 years on an interest payment to get you in the house today. And that certainly helps a lot of like the young professionals that have greater earning potential 2 and 3 years away. It also, for those folks that think rates will go lower, it gives them the opportunity to get in today and then potentially refinance in a year or two before they get to that 5.5 rate. So it's a cool feature if it's for the right person.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. If you want more information on Mark, just go to mortgagemark.com. Mark, always great to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. This real estate market is really interesting when you look at the dynamics that are happening with interest rates that are going up, and interest rates really haven't budged in the mortgage markets over the past couple of months, but yet they've come down in the bond market. And then you've got today, which it was pretty well expected that interest rates would go up by 0.75%, but nothing really followed that, at least in the markets per se. I can't speak for mortgage rates, but and it's interesting stuff. We'll have to see where it ends up. Hey, this is Bob Brooks. You got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time. Keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.